Some people are actually really worried, oh my gosh, I'm irritable, am I becoming as toxic as them? That irritability means you're human. And under the abuse and discomfort, and at times the trauma of the narcissistic relationship, irritability is to be expected. It is simply being a human being. Welcome back to this series on the patterns we observe in narcissistic abuse. It's really meant to be a walk through the kinds of things that happen to people who are experiencing chronic and even acute narcissistic abuse, to lend some understanding, to see what applies to you, and hopefully some things you can do about it. Today we're going to take on the issue of difficulties with concentration that are experienced by people who are experiencing narcissistic abuse. Before we get to that, please, as always, if you want, join this community, subscribe to this channel, hit the bell if you want notifications for the daily videos or near daily videos that come out. And if you want to drop anything in the comments, even examples of the kinds of concentration problems you're having, that would be really great for everyone to know, because I want all of you to know none of you are alone in this. So let's talk about the difficulties with concentration that are often observed in people experiencing narcissistic abuse. Anyone who is in any form of a relationship with a narcissist, whether it's family, work, or personal relationship, will tell you that they do have difficulty concentrating, especially at times when things are more difficult than the usual difficult in their relationship. Some of this connects to what we've already talked about, which is rumination. You get stuck in your head about your narcissistic situation and you can't let it go. So obviously that makes it difficult to pay attention to other things. Anything that's intrusive makes it hard to concentrate. But it goes beyond just the rumination generated by the narcissistic relationships. Narcissistic relationships are also quite disruptive. It's like living with a crying infant, except the difference is that the infant is innocent, sweet, and can likely be soothed. With the narcissist in your life, they can be intrusive, insistent, interrupting you all the time, sending you lots of texts, calling you, making noise, and not caring that anything that they're doing is disruptive. Again, that lack of empathy. In some ways, they interrupt your concentration just by their existence and their behavior, and that has nothing to do even with what's going on in your head. It's just them making noise in the environment. The narcissistic relationship is an unsolvable problem, and in that way, it can be mentally intrusive as well. You try to think of solutions to this unsolvable problem or things to say, and you keep getting disrupted by the idea that there's nothing that you can do. Because the narcissistic relationship in your life is absolutely not an enhancement to your life, it's far more likely to be a disruption in your life, it absolutely makes your ability to focus really, really problematic. Keep in mind that because of their lack of empathy, their lack of self-awareness, their lack of self-reflective capacity, they don't really care that they're disrupting you. And if you tell them or ask them nicely, could you please stop, or ask them to consider other people with the noise they're making, you're then likely to face even more disruption, because now they're yelling at you or angry at you, and then you're going to have more difficulties with concentration because now you're even more angry about the situation. It always feels like a double bind catch-22. Now, if you grew up in a narcissistic family, you know that these challenges with concentration may have been enough to cause you difficulty in school or other kinds of school-like activities. In fact, someone may have even wondered if you have attention deficit disorder, instead of wondering if you growing up in an invalidating, gaslighting nightmare was actually the real issue. No, they make it about you. There is such a heavy unhappiness that accompanies coming from a narcissistic family. Kids from these families can feel confused and ashamed, and these feelings can preoccupy them during the school day and when it's time to do their homework. And because children from narcissistic families rarely hear any words of encouragement, the main activity of childhood, that does require any attention from any child, which is really school, often suffers as a result. The stakes can be high for school while the child is in school. Some children may believe that if they do really well at school, that they'll get positive regard from their oh so conditionally loving narcissistic parent. And so then they may be ultra focused on doing well in school. But they get distracted by how high the stakes are. If I get an A on my math test, my dad's going to love me. Most of the other kids in the classroom didn't have to do that calculation on their math test. These preoccupations can distract you into adulthood, college, workplace settings. And then, if you should enter another narcissistic relationship, the concentration difficulties may begin again. If you work in a toxic workplace, concentration can be a real struggle. At some level, you are always distracted by your difficult supervisor or your difficult toxic coworker, or just by the toxic overall setting or culture. And that may make you less productive. And hey, word to all of the difficult toxic workplaces out there, instead of verbally abusing your employees for not being productive, if you just made the workplace less toxic, y'all would get a lot more positive results from your employees. Having to monitor your environment for harm, for threats, and the constant need to appease the narcissist is also preoccupying and distracting and can impede your concentration. You can see how this may have started in childhood, always monitoring to make sure mom or dad wouldn't fly into a rage. And then it may evolve into adulthood, appeasing the difficult, malcontented spouse, or ensuring that your toxic boss is adequately enabled so they can get through the day. I have had a few clients tell me that they felt like they had narc brain. And by that, they meant that they felt like they had trouble remembering stuff, tracking conversations, paying attention, focusing on details. It makes sense. We actually see similar patterns in people with post-traumatic stress symptoms, the constant environmental monitoring and hypervigilance. That sympathetic nervous system activation, the fight, flight, and freeze that you pretty regularly live in while you're in a narcissistic relationship, puts a lot of wear and tear on all of your systems and simply makes it more difficult to think and pay attention and obviously concentrate. So what are you supposed to do if you have all these problems with concentration? Number one, if you can't get out of this relationship, then at a minimum, please start by no longer multitasking. Do one thing at a time. Multitasking actually doesn't work for any of us on a good day, but with the preoccupation of a narcissistic relationship, it becomes really important to just focus on one thing at a time, so you will be less likely to get distracted, and that your problems and struggles with concentration will be less likely to lead to mistakes. Number two, I want you to practice mindfulness. Learn for a little bit of time each day to stay in the moment in front of you, even when you're not doing anything. Mindfulness pays tremendous dividends and allows you to have better concentration when you actually are doing something and something important. It's like a muscle you flex, and then you can use it when you need it. The third thing I want you to do is I want you to create workarounds. The narcissist is a big impediment, like a massive boulder in the middle of your living room that you need to work around. Wake up earlier, stay up later, find a quiet place in the house, even if it's in the bathroom, if that's where you need to go to get something done. Narcissists are never going to stop intruding and interrupting. You may need to do the workaround to find quieter spaces and times. Number four, get organized. While being organized is not necessarily a substitute for concentration, it can eliminate some distractions, and it may leave you feeling less chaotic, which is so much of how people feel in narcissistic relationships. Number five, you know what's coming. Therapy. You know what I'm going to say. Therapy becomes a place to offload some of the most difficult emotions and thoughts, to just clear your mind out a little so you can concentrate. A lot of people come into therapy, dump it all out, and say, all right, I feel a little more clear now. A narcissistic relationship is difficult enough. Lack of concentration is a common pattern in those surviving narcissistic abuse, and it can leave you feeling more out of it than the relationship already does. Again, this sort of constant feeling like you're in a cloud and can't pay attention to anything can definitely take a toll on you in school, at work, and in other things that matter to you, including parenting. It's a commonplace pattern. It's also a pattern we see in other mental health issues like depression. So if you're experiencing both of those things at the same time, narcissistic abuse and depression, the concentration problems are going to be really, really tough for you. But be kind to yourself, be gentle to yourself. And honestly, sometimes just when you get rid of that relationship, you're going to notice that after a period of healing, your concentration's going to be just fine. And so let's talk about sleep. How'd you sleep last night? For many of you, I have a feeling the answer might have been okay. Now, you know this scenario well. Let's say it's one night you think about something the narcissist said or did, their gaslighting, their manipulation, their blame shifting. It gets stuck in your head. Maybe it was a partner blaming you for their cheating. Maybe it was a toxic boss who stole an idea and didn't credit you for your contributions. Maybe it was a toxic mother or father or other family member who continually gets at you with their passive-aggressive barbs and their cruel words. Those things get stuck in your head. And we often see another pattern in narcissistic abuse raise its head, which we've already talked about, which is rumination. That rumination can often happen just as you're about to drift off to sleep. You think about that mistake that so many people make right before they go to sleep. What do? Yeah, they look at their phone. So then you see that one text message or email or social media post, invariably toxic or betraying, and they get stuck in your head. And sleep, after seeing that, is about as likely as a unicorn galloping into your bedroom. But the sleep difficulties don't end there. The more challenging pattern that often arises in narcissistic abuse, it's not the falling asleep, it's not the waking up in the morning, it's the waking up in the middle of the night when the rumination kicks in again. You may play that argument over and over again in your head. You may keep reading that nasty text, hear their comments, ruminate on the gaslighting, and wonder how you can fix it. And you simply cannot eliminate that thought from your head. So you wake up and you stare at the ceiling and it grinds through your head. That middle of the night waking with the rumination in your head may be the most common sleep challenge raised by narcissistic abuse. The other challenge raised by narcissistic abuse, of course, is that it leaves you exhausted. You are mentally depleted, always having to deal with the invalidation, the confusion, and just the unhappiness of being in such a hollow and abusive relationship. It's not a healthy life, and it does deplete you. So you are tired. But the intrusive thoughts and anxiety and confusion mean that now you have exhaustion coupled with interrupted sleep, which is a terribly unhealthy combination and makes it more likely that you're going to have more conflicts in your narcissistic relationship. When people ask me the one thing that you can do that can be a turnaround for your health, it's good sleep. One good uninterrupted night of sleep may be as close to a cure-all or a panacea we have in mental health. And we also know that sleep disturbance is a classical part of many mental illnesses and is a classical part of experiencing narcissistic abuse. So, by virtue of experiencing narcissistic abuse, you have limited access to something that can have myriad benefits for your health. Narcissistic abuse plus lack of sleep, it's a cruel catch-22. And the darker side is that consistent sleep disruption is actually really bad for your health. It can either exacerbate existing health problems you have and perhaps even render you vulnerable to new ones. If you originated from a narcissistic family of origin, so sadly, the sleep difficulties may have been a part of your childhood. Children from narcissistic families are terribly anxious, and that anxiety in children always disrupts their sleep. The invalidation of parents means that childhood fears around sleep and nightmares are minimized and trivialized. The chaos of narcissistic families mean that there can be noise, arguing, and chaos at bedtime. There's no one to really tuck them in and read them a story. The confusion of a narcissistic family means that a child may ruminate upon going to bed wondering, how can I be better? How can I be better? How can I get mommy to notice me? And poor sleep habits in childhood can generalize into poor sleep habits in adulthood. The chaos of narcissistic relationships means that chaos can quite often happen at bedtime. Tension, arguments, rage, and the closer to bedtime that these things happen, the greater the probability that you're going to have sleep difficulties that night. Another pattern that has sometimes been shared with me is from the people who feel compelled to get up very early, even after not getting enough sleep the night before, just to get some peace, to get their time away from the narcissist. The narcissist may still be sleeping, but there may be a real pull to take advantage of the few peaceful moments before the narcissist's negativity punctures your space. And this pattern may also apply on the front end of the night, which with some people saying they will stay up later than the narcissist so they can get their quiet time before bedtime. But when you couple the late bedtime or the early awakening with interrupted sleep, yep, it means you're getting inadequate sleep. So what do? Obviously, you follow the standard advice on sleep hygiene, but that advice can come up a little bit short here. The usual advice is a regular bedtime, a dark room, a cooler temperature, a comfortable bed, not looking at electronics or other blue light devices like TVs ahead of sleep, making sure those blue lights don't pop during the night, avoiding caffeine late in the day, avoiding alcohol, using white noise or other devices to cancel ambient noises needed. That's just sort of sleep hygiene. I'm going to tell you this right now. All the damned white noise in the world isn't going to stop the noises in your head when you're dealing with a narcissistic relationship. So while these are all good tips in general, the bottom line is the frustration of the narcissistic relationship is the issue, not staying up and playing Candy Crush at bedtime. And by the way, guilty. Number 2, be careful about pharmaceuticals as a regular way of getting to sleep. While sleep medications as prescribed by a physician can work in a pinch, regular reliance on them is not good for you. Work with your healthcare provider so you do not become reliant on prescription sleep medicine, maybe in a pinch, but not regularly. Number 3, if you haven't already, go take a look at the rumination video. Use some of the anti-rumination tips as a tool to squelch some of this thinking so it doesn't pour into bedtime and into the middle of the night. Number 4, I'm going to say it again, every single one of these videos, therapy. Talk about what's bothering you. Sometimes just venting, even if you are still in the relationship, can validate you and help you let go of some of it so you can sleep. Number 5, I want you to breathe. Breathing works. Deep breaths, mantras, and there are even apps out there that are supposed to offer some help with breathing and other sleep sounds and routines and just things that lull you into sleep. Maybe check into some of those too. It could just at least be a momentary distraction that helps you sleep. A lot of the usual sleep advice doesn't always work when you are experiencing a narcissistic relationship. In fact, there is interesting workplace research that indicates that a toxic work setting often does its greatest damage to us and our health through our sleep, which means you aren't functioning as well. Obviously, not having to deal with the narcissist would fix your sleep mighty fast, but if that's not an option, you need something else. Sometimes the tried and true techniques to manage a narcissist, realistic expectations, radical acceptance, and not engaging, can at least give you a toolkit to help you push back on the helplessness and rumination of the narcissistic relationship. So, of course, this is when I'm going to say good luck and hopefully good night. And before I let you go, think about that old saying. They say you're never supposed to go to sleep angry. Listen, if you're in a narcissistic relationship, you go to bed angry more often than not. So this is why I'm saying a lot of the prevailing wisdom on sleep can be tough when you're going through a narcissistic relationship. But at a minimum, and this is a quick fix, just don't read those text messages and emails an hour before bedtime. Invariably, a narcissist will often not respect the boundaries of time and send you a nasty work email, a nasty text, whatever it is, late at night so you can ruminate over it. Do not look at it. Get an old-fashioned clock if you want to be able to tell the time at night, but do not look at your messagey watch or your phone in the middle of the night to figure out the time. Just that one place is a great place to start. So again, even though when we think of irritability, we often think that's the narcissist who's the irritable one. Irritability in and of itself is actually a negative mood state, like depression, that is not uncommon in survivors of narcissistic abuse. Irritability is a manifestation, like most negative mood states, of discomfort, and a discomfort that can often get more activated by the demands of life, stress, and other people. When we're irritable, we're definitely not at our best, and we're often giving more curt and blunt answers. We get very impatient. We're more likely to lash out at other people. Irritability is very unpleasant to experience, not only personally, but also to be on the receiving side of someone else's irritability. So why would narcissistic abuse manifest or be experienced as irritability? Well, there's likely to be a couple of mechanisms for this. First, irritability might be one way that you're experiencing the helplessness, the powerlessness, and the futility of a narcissistic relationship. At some point, anyone's patience is going to run out. And when you are also juggling the other demands of life, I don't know, job, stress, children, money problems, issues around the house or apartment, your car breaking down, and you're also having to manage the rather significant stress of a narcissistic relationship, it can start making you more brittle and more snappy, okay? When it's kind of biting someone's head off. Then, in some ways, if you are in a narcissistic relationship or have been raised by narcissistic parents, then if you did that, then you've just finished a masterclass in irritability just by watching the narcissist in your life who has irritability down to an art form. Given that irritability is often a prominent feature in narcissistic personality styles, you may find yourself just simply mirroring what you witness in your daily life or what you grew up with. It's not a nice feeling because for most people, they want to be as different from their narcissist of origin or their narcissistic relationship as possible. Irritability can also result in another string of negative effects. As I already said, the irritability can be a manifestation of sort of feeling stuck in your narcissistic relationship. But then, let's say you do snap at someone or just get angry or you just aren't acting like your best self. You may then find yourself feeling quite guilty and feeling badly about yourself for treating other people so badly, so you may be vulnerable to sliding even more deeply into negative mood states. Now, stress often results in irritability for all of us, especially when that stress feels unmanageable. And this is what happens in a narcissistic relationship. The stress of the narcissistic relationship can really feel unmanageable. And coupled with other stressors and stress in your life, it's almost a guarantee that a person would get irritable under these circumstances. The irritability may also manifest as not wanting to be with other people. And since many people who endure narcissistic abuse are quite empathic and don't want to hurt other people, and they may personally sense that irritability coming up in them because they're so tired of this narcissistic relationship and not like this irritability they're experiencing, they may actually start to increasingly socially isolate because they don't want to lash out at other people, or they become impatient. So they may actually heed the cues, like the message that your irritability sends you, and withdraw from other people, which isn't good for you because narcissistic abuse can actually take more of a toll when a person is more isolated. Irritability may have started as a pattern for you as early as childhood. And that may actually have been something that you may have experienced or shown at school as sort of being grumpy with your peers as a little kid. And it makes sense because as a child, you likely did feel helpless and frustrated with the inconsistency around you. Where it gets tricky is when you express this irritability to the narcissist. As you can imagine, there is typically only room for one irritable person in a narcissistic relationship, and that tends to be the narcissist. If you get irritable with them, they will tend to be punitive, much more irritable than you, and they may pathologize you and gaslight you, painting you as the difficult one in the relationship. Irritability is actually not like some of the other patterns that we have talked about in this series on narcissistic abuse, the patterns that happen like confusion, which is an almost universal pattern in narcissistic abuse. Not everybody in a narcissistic relationship and not everybody who experiences narcissistic abuse is irritable. But it is not uncommon, and no, your shorter than usual fuse doesn't mean you're becoming narcissistic. Some people are actually really worried, oh my gosh, I'm irritable, am I becoming as toxic as them? That irritability means you're human. And under the abuse and discomfort, and at times the trauma of the narcissistic relationship, irritability is to be expected. It is simply being a human being. So what are you supposed to do about this irritability? Number one, find an outlet for it. Sometimes when we are irritable, it's merely a manifestation of frustration. So here's some guidance. Unfrustrate. Physical activity or physical movement of some kind can help. A walk, a swim, a workout, even cleaning the house. Or get those soft bats, if you've ever seen those, and hit your bed with them. But don't just hit the bed. Say something to let go of the frustration, like, you are not gaslighting me anymore. This is my reality. Activity can be a reboot, and it can move your focus. Second, give yourself a little space and gentleness when you feel irritable. By doing it in this way, you may be less likely to withdraw out of fear, but just recognize that you're not at your best and give yourself a minute to slow down, breathe, and reconstitute. By just respecting your mood for a moment, because the narcissist isn't going to respect your mood, you may just be able to get yourself a little bit more clear-headed and be less likely to maybe lash out irritably at other people. Third, I want you to practice some self-kindness. Experiencing narcissistic abuse takes a toll on you. Irritability is a normal manifestation of stress. Just recognize it as a normal mood state and know that like all mood states, it will pass. Fourth, keep an eye on it. If the irritability persists, it may not just pass by itself, because keep this in mind, irritability can be a primary manifestation of depression, which should be identified and treated early. We typically associate depression with a sad mood, but in fact, more people than you would think, especially men, can manifest their depression as irritability more than as sadness, and as a result, it can get missed. But treatment for depression can often address this. Experiencing narcissistic abuse is a major stressor that can exacerbate existing depression or be a trigger for a depressive episode. So it's important you get that irritability checked out if it doesn't just pass after a day or so. Listen, nobody likes being grumpy or feeling grumpy, maybe except for the malcontented narcissists in our midst. But that irritability can be a sign. Heed it, be kind, get it checked out, and understand that anyone experiencing the unique, unfixable stress of narcissistic abuse is bound to have more than a few bad days. So I hope that helps you understand your irritability. Doesn't feel good, but pay attention to it. Can narcissistic abuse literally make you physically ill? I'd base it on what I've seen. I'd say, yeah, it does. So let's just take this on solely from a stress perspective. Being in a narcissistic relationship is stressful, and stress has numerous impacts on health. Headaches, muscle tension, diminished immune function, which can in turn make you more vulnerable to all kinds of illnesses. If you have pre-existing health conditions such as autoimmune disorders, asthma, diabetes, stress can exacerbate the course of your illness. And if you have a more acute illness such as cancer, experiencing narcissistic abuse, as with any acute illness, may potentially result in a poorer course just because of the ongoing stress, which makes engaging in treatment, adherence, and coping all the more difficult. There are a couple of different pathways by which narcissistic abuse can actually affect your physical health. First, there's a sort of direct pathway as a source of stress, narcissistic abuse being a source of stress, and the release of stress hormones such as glucocorticoids, and then the glucocorticoid regulation. And these things impact immune functioning, as well as things like, for example, inflammatory responses that would exacerbate asthma, autoimmune diseases, and type 2 diabetes. And this glucocorticoid dysregulation is also associated with the onset of mental illnesses. Now, narcissistic abuse is a unique form of stress. It can be long-term. In some cases, it is inescapable. Many people still do not fully understand it. So there's a risk your experience with this stressor can be minimized by other people. And as you actually start feeling physically ill, you may not actually connect the toxic person in your life with the slow deterioration of your health. Doing the kind of research we need to do to substantiate this is not going to be easy. In an ideal world, we would follow people for many years, monitor their health, measure their relationships and the relationship quality and stress levels, and watch what happens. I hope someone does that relationship by the time, I hope someone does that research. By the time it comes out, I'm going to be long dead, okay? My observational perch on this, though, has been solely observational. I have watched otherwise healthy people develop illnesses that didn't make sense, given their age and their physical condition, or have had illnesses that had much more complex courses. And the one thing that they had in common was long-term relationships with people who had very difficult personalities. The physical effects we observe in people experiencing narcissistic abuse can also happen through indirect pathways. Specifically, people experiencing narcissistic abuse stop taking good care of themselves. They don't adhere to their medication. They don't get good sleep. They don't get good nutrition. They don't engage in any healthy exercise. Those of you experiencing narcissistic abuse, and this was actually another episode in the series, you have terrible self-care. And since the narcissists in your life don't care whether or not you take care of yourself or not, but let me tell you this, those narcissists sure as hell ensure that they take very good care of themselves, and they expect everyone to get on board with that. You don't have someone reminding you to take care of you, stepping in, or actually caring for you. Over the long term, the person experiencing narcissistic abuse simply stops trying, can get bogged down in the apathy, and the futility of these relationships can translate into you not adequately taking care of yourself and taking the stance of, ugh, why bother? This is real, and I am a firm believer that these narcissistic relationships take years off of our lives. The constant sympathetic nervous system activation that a person experiences when they're in a narcissistic relationship, and by sympathetic nervous system I mean that fight, flight, or freeze response, means that our bodies are running at a state of physiological strain that puts a lot of wear and tear on us for the long term. It's like driving a car into the ground and never getting the oil changed or the car maintained. And for many people, narcissistic relationships are a lifelong struggle. It may be a parent that they've been grappling with all their lives, well into adulthood, or having had to deal with it in childhood. And now, in adulthood, you're dealing with a difficult or narcissistic partner or spouse. It can feel unrelenting, and I can promise you this, it is taking a toll on your body. Many people in narcissistic relationships report experiencing a sort of brain fog. It's sort of this sense of not being able to think straight or think well or think sharply. It's interesting because it's very similar to what people who have other forms of brain fog. Where I've most commonly heard this is those who are completing or have completed, for example, a course of chemotherapy, people taking other kinds of medications, people living with fatigue-inducing disorders. And those are other places that brain fog happens. Brain fog is also a commonplace issue in people living with narcissistic abuse, and it can exacerbate an already growing sense of self-doubt and confusion. If you grew up with a narcissistic parent or parents, you may have struggled with the physical symptoms of narcissistic abuse through stomach aches, headaches, even skin rashes, which are all ways that stress can physiologically manifest in a child. As a child, you may have also been more prone to colds and other viral illnesses. Listen, a child can't even put a name to this, but the child obviously is going to get exhausted from walking on eggshells and living with an unappeasable parent. Researchers such as Janice Kiecolt-Glaser have documented the deleterious health effects of marital conflict on immune function. Her research is actually quite fascinating. I always think that we could potentially extrapolate her research to narcissistic relationships. Narcissists certainly do not fight fair, and years of the toxic, difficult conflict and abuse is likely to be wearing down your immune system. So the short answer really is that your narcissistic relationship may be hazardous for your health. So what do you do? First of all, if you haven't done this for a long time, please get a physical, and ideally get regular physicals, especially if you're in a narcissistically abusive situation. At a minimum, you'll be able to monitor the onset of any preventable or early detectable health conditions, and at a minimum, stay on top of your health. Number 2, please at least do the preventative healthcare stuff that you can. Try and eat better. Sleep a little bit more, sleep under better conditions if you can. Take your medications regularly. Get some activity into your life. Do not wait for the narcissist to step up and offer to have your back when it comes to your health. In general, they don't really care. Narcissistic people don't like sick people, and you will exhaust yourself if you try to induce them into caring about you and your health. Number 3, please be aware of your own family health history so you know your own health vulnerabilities. Again, this ties into that first recommendation I made to get regular screenings for your health. But this becomes doubly important if there are family health issues that can place you at greater risk for the dangerous effects of stress-induced illnesses. Number 4, look alive with infectious diseases, especially during flu season. And I'm saying this during a pandemic, okay? This also matters for that too. If you're enduring narcissistic abuse, odds are your immune system isn't the best. And since the narcissist is not going to take care of you if you get sick, it's better you don't get sick in the first place. Number 5, please have a real plan in place if you get sick. If you think your narcissist is going to be the one who's always ready to drive you to chemotherapy or doctor's appointments, think again. Because even if they do step up to the plate, they're going to complain about it a lot. Make a plan with friends or other family members. Don't make the mistake that so many others who have experienced narcissistic abuse have made. Don't think that once you get sick, that the narcissist will finally step up and take care of you. It's not going to happen. And you do not want to be scrambling after all of this, after you get sick, while enduring the grief that in fact the narcissist does not have your back, even when you're sick, because the fantasy is that's when they'd step up. Number 6, therapy. Therapy is important. It's an important stress-busting tool and a great place to learn tools to cope, not only hopefully with this relationship, but also with stress, and just have a place to let it all out. So when I say that narcissistic abuse makes you sick, I really mean it. If you can't get out of this relationship, and I know a lot of you can't get out of your narcissistic relationships, set the boundaries you need to stay healthy. Even if your narcissist doesn't care, there are people in your life who do. For once, please choose yourself. Your health may depend on it. And I want to leave you with one last tip, because I asked you about, I told you you need to know your family history. What gets really tricky is if part of your family is narcissistic, they may not be as forthcoming with their family history. While everybody's still young enough and alive, please get that information, because you may need to ask a benevolent aunt who lives on the other side of the country or the world. Quickly get all that health information, because if you do have limited communication with a narcissistic family member, you may not be able to get that comprehensive health history, and you would be surprised how useful some of these sorts of health historical issues can be for your healthcare provider, especially given the stress you're under because of narcissistic abuse, to understand your health and the vulnerabilities you may have to stress. So please, always stay on top of your health, because let me tell you, this relationship ain't good for it. Thanks again for tuning in. Please join us on this channel. Subscribe. I hope you've been sharing with the kinds of physical problems you've been having, if you feel comfortable. Again, if you don't, I understand. I completely understand, especially if you want to remain anonymous. And also, hit that notification bell so you can be reminded every time we put up a new content, because listen, these videos may be a very healthy part of your life. Thanks, bye.